Welcome to the second video in a series where we explore the process of getting various versions of Linux up and running, all the way from downloading from the webpage into running our first game, and all the steps in between. Today we're looking at Mint. At the time of recording, Mint is currently the second most popular distribution according to DistroWatch. Quick disclaimer for those who have seen the Manjaro versus Windows video. We will be revisiting a few bits and pieces here, so it might seem a tiny bit repetitive, but that's for the people who haven't seen that video. I would like these videos to be as whole as possible, meaning that you don't need to go and watch every one of my other videos in order to understand this one. Speaking of Manjaro though, in my last video, I discussed how different Linux distributions have different foundations, and the two most popular foundations are Debian and Arch. Manjaro was built off of Arch. Mint is built off of Debian. However, it's not quite that simple. You see, Linux distributions being built off of other Linux distributions is a completely normal thing. It's like a fork. In the case of Mint, it is actually a fork of Ubuntu, which is a fork of Debian. But does that mean you should skip Mint and go straight to Ubuntu? Absolutely not. Mint has a lot to offer that Ubuntu doesn't. I have an Ubuntu video coming up soon, so stay tuned for that. But for now, let's focus on Mint. And another thing I'll reiterate too, this is a focus for how beginners would see this, not necessarily just tech-savvy people. So if you want to use this video as a tutorial, then you will need some prior reading or prior watching. Being that this is the only time I really have to absolutely recommend another video if this part goes too fast for you, and that's this video here, try before you buy. But for those of you who want the fast version, here it comes. Grab a USB. This will be a sacrificial USB. You can change it back later, but for now, all the data on it will be wiped if you are following this as a tutorial. So make sure to back up all the data on this USB so you don't lose anything important. And with that USB in hand, you will need two pieces of software. The first is called Ballerina Etcher. This is what we'll use to flash our USB. If you're not sure what that means, that's okay, you'll see it in a moment. Along with Ballerina Etcher, you'll also need Ventoy, specifically the live CD version of Ventoy. With a sacrificial USB and all your data backed up, Ballerina Etcher installed for either Windows, Mac or Linux, and the live CD version of Ventoy, you're ready to begin. Open Ballerina Etcher, and in the first section, you want to select Ventoy. This will be the image that we flash to the USB. In the second section, you want to select your sacrificial USB. So we're going to flash an image of Ventoy onto this USB. And once you're ready, remember, make sure you've got your data backed up before you hit that flash button. But I'm assuming you've heeded my warning so far, and if you have and your data's backed up, hit the flash button. Your Ventoy USB should now be ready to go. Again, if that was too fast for you, I go much slower and into much more detail in my try before you buy video. And for those of you who are just kicking back and watching the process to see if Mint is right for you, we're about to get started, so let's do it. Over in my browser, in my search engine, I'm going to type in Linux Mint. Specifically Linux Mint because you might get various other options related to the name Mint, so specifying Linux really helps. Now we're looking for the link that looks like this. Make sure it looks like this and it's not something else trying to pretend to be Mint or any other distribution of Linux, or maybe a completely separate product altogether. But once you're sure it's the right URL, click on it and we're off to the Mint webpage. We're off to a great start here, much like Manjaro. A big download button on the front page and no cookie notices. You'll find out later why no cookie notices is important when we look at some other distros. Spoiler alert. So when we click on the download button, we end up with various versions of Mint to pick from. The first at the top of the list is Mint Cinnamon. In my first video, I discussed that one of the biggest differences between Linux distributions was their desktop environment. This, in a very, very shallow way, is the top layer, the layer that you interact with. The two most popular desktop environments are KDE and GNOME. But here at the top is Cinnamon. This is Mint's very own desktop environment, and it is the default version, so that's the one we're going to install properly today. So click on the download link and then scroll down to the bottom of this page. You will see various download links called mirrors here. The first link always works for me, so you could pick a location specific link if you'd like, but I'm just going to click on World. Once I've clicked on that, Mint will download. I've set it to download to my desktop, but yours might go to your downloads folder as that's the default location for most browsers. Once that's downloaded over on my desktop, and for you in your downloads folder, most likely, I'm going to plug in the Ventoy USB. With the Ventoy USB plugged in, I'm going to either drag and drop or copy and paste the ISO file for Linux Mint over onto the USB. Once that's transferred over, I'm going to click eject. Now, just in case I haven't said back up your data enough times, I'm now going to recommend that if this is the computer that you want to wipe its operating system from, most likely Windows, and install Linux on, back up all of your data now, before we shut it down to install Linux Mint. Even if you want to install Linux Mint onto a completely separate SSD inside the same computer, or you want to partition the drive, no matter which installation method you pick, I would always recommend making sure you have multiple backups of all of your important data, because otherwise we all learn the hard way why backups are very important. So assuming you've heeded my warning again and backed up your data, turn off the computer that you want to install Linux Mint on, and plug in your Ventoy USB into that computer while it's off. Now hover over the delete key of the keyboard attached to that computer, or the F2 key, depending on your motherboard's manufacturer. It could be either or. With one hand hovered over the delete or F2 key, turn on the computer with your other hand, and then rapidly press the delete key repeatedly until you get into the BIOS. This is what my BIOS looks like. If your computer just boots as normal, then shut it down and try again. Perhaps trying the F2 key if you try delete and vice versa. If you're in the BIOS, we're looking for an option called Boot Override. In this Gigabyte BIOS, it is over in the Save and Exit menu. I'm using the arrow keys to navigate there, and then once I find the Boot Override menu, I'm going to find my USB, which is named something different to inside my operating system. My USB is named Telcast Cool Flash. I don't know why. Once you've got that hovered, press the Enter key, and you should boot into Ventoy. Once you're in Ventoy, make sure you're hovered over Mint, using the arrow keys to hover over something else if you have different distributions on here, and press Enter while you're on Mint. This menu requires you to press Enter again and one final time, and that should boot us right into Linux Mint. You should see the Mint logo pop up now, and after potentially a few minutes, we're booted into the Try Before You Buy or Live USB version of Mint. There's nothing quite like a clean desktop. This is where I stopped in the Try Before You Buy video, but we're going to keep going today. With your mouse, double click on the Install Linux Mint icon on the top left of your desktop. This will boot up the Mint installer application. Language and keyboard settings are self-explanatory and the defaults were perfectly fine for me. I won't be installing multimedia codecs as I know that I personally don't need them, but if you do need them or you think you might need them, then feel free to tick this box. Next up, Mint gives us the option to install alongside other distros. I had Ubuntu installed on this before, more on that later, so Mint is giving me the option to install alongside Ubuntu. But I don't want to do that. I want to pretend that this computer is only going to have one operating system on it, so I'm going to click the Erase Disk option. On the next page, we get to pick which SSD you want to install on. If you've only got the one SSD, then that's all that should appear here. But if you have multiple SSDs, double check you're selecting the right SSD, because remember, whatever's on that SSD will be entirely wiped, and if you haven't backed up your data, you're going to lose it. So make sure you back it up. If you didn't back it up the other 20 times I said it in this video. And it's not just me telling you to back up. Even the Mint installer is double checking that you know that you're going to wipe your disk. Next onto the time zone, and finally to the Windows can't do this section. If you didn't see my Manjaro video, that might confuse you a little bit, but let me explain. See that account there where you type in a name and password? That's a local account. Windows 11 doesn't do local accounts. They removed the option to do local accounts in Windows 10. And by doesn't do, I mean out of the box. Remember, this isn't Windows and Linux for the tech savvy. This is Windows and Linux for beginners. So if it doesn't work out of the box, or it takes a lot to tinker with, I'm not considering it. So I don't care how many other methods there are to get local accounts working on Windows 11. If a beginner can't do it and follows simple instructions to do it, no command prompt is not a simple instruction, then I'm not going to consider it beginner friendly. Why are local accounts important? That's simple. Imagine I wanted to install without the internet. Yeah, that's it. I should be able to use a computer without the internet, which I know sounds kind of crazy in 2025, but there were times when we used a computer without the internet. And I kind of still think that should still be a thing. But let's say that you think the internet will be around forever and there's no chance that you will ever have an outage in a million years. Well, how about privacy? Because now everything you do on your Windows 11 computer, where you just signed in with your Microsoft ID, everything you do on that computer, Microsoft can now assign to a person. And if you've been using your Microsoft email for other sensitive data, they've built a profile on you. And they're just using it to advertise to you now. But with all the age verification things going around in the internet, you see where I'm going? Local accounts. Good idea. As for the second thing Windows can't do, log in automatically. Imagine you're trying to set up this as a console replacement, meaning that you should only be using a controller to control this PC. Steam can do it, but Windows demands, absolutely insists beyond all reason that you type in your password every single time, even if there's no sensitive data on that computer. So Windows doesn't have a login automatically option. Again, I don't care if you can go to regedit and fix it. Try explaining that to your parents or grandparents. It ain't gonna fly. Your computer's name is the name that your home network will see. So if you like to check your home network to see if anyone's on there that shouldn't be there, then make sure this name is something that you will remember so you don't think it's an unauthorized device. And with that, the install process begins. I only had one issue with the install process. When we got to language packs, I clicked the skip button, but it didn't work for me. I'm not sure why, and again, like with my problems with Manjaro, this could have just been a me thing. So I'm not sure why it didn't work. But with the language packs downloading and installing, it took me about 20 minutes. Not the worst, still blows Windows out of the park at over half an hour, but that time would be a lot shorter if it wasn't for those language packs, because two things factor into an install time. The hardware you're installing to, how fast your CPU is, and your RAM, and if that install process needs to download anything from the internet. I've already said that I really like the idea of being able to do this without the internet, so I'm sure if I did this without internet, it wouldn't be a problem. Maybe I'll try it again in the future. And more importantly, if the skip button worked for you, or if the install time was even quicker for you, please let me know. Once we're done, click the restart button, and then one final thing we have to do before we get into the real deal. You just have to press enter when it says to remove your install media here. That is just part of the live USB section of Mint, and it won't pop up again once we boot into the SSD. Speaking of which, once your computer restarts, we should be in the full-blown version of Mint, ready to go. Like with Manjaro, we get one whole pop-up. That's one, count 'em, one. Windows could learn a thing or two. And all you have to do to stop this pop-up from happening is go to the bottom right, click the toggle, and then close the window at the top right. And that's it. That's all you get for pop-ups. For those using 4K displays, right-click on the desktop, go over to display settings, and pick 200% on scaling. I'm using 1080p, so 100% is perfect for me. But unlike Manjaro, to get to the rest of the settings, we can't just click back. That is because something Cinnamon does is it separates all of its settings into what look like different apps. So in order for me to go and find dark mode, I'm going to close out of display settings, go over to the not a start menu, click on that, and go to preferences. When I'm hovering over preferences, it might seem a little overwhelming at first, but it's not. I'm going to take you through the adventure as I went through it. The color profile isn't what we want. That is just to adjust the color balance for your monitor. It's not under desktop either. but I do like the option to turn off showing mounted devices on the desktop. Because this menu is in alphabetical order, we're looking for themes, which naturally is down the bottom. So when you click on themes, you get your options. We're using a mixed mode now, which is why the not a taskbar down the bottom is black and why the window is white. But I want a full dark mode. Personally, I don't have a problem with the settings menus being separated into different apps. It doesn't bother me. However, if it did bother me, I'd probably just use a different desktop environment. Next up on my list is updates. In the bottom right of the not a taskbar, you will see a little icon prompting us to update, not an obtrusive, annoying window in the middle of the screen telling us that if we don't update, the world's going to end. Clicking on this opens the Update Manager. And in the Update Manager, this little pop-up at the top here, this little blue thing, I'm going to assume a beginner would likely click no. So on my second time round, I clicked no and my updates installed just fine. And don't worry about this terminal-like window either if you are a beginner. This is a terminal we don't have to interact with. We just have to let the computer do its thing. Now the next Windows can't do this test I have, which we did on Manjaro, is what happens after we update and restart. So, once we're done with these updates, let's restart and see what happens. You might be a little confused why I'm making a point of this. This is because Windows likes to do pretend updates, meaning that you do an update, but then the next time you reboot your computer, you get blasted with, let's finish setting up some things, followed by use Microsoft's recommended browser settings. And this isn't a pop-up, this is a full-page ad stopping you from using your computer. Manjaro didn't do this. Manjaro let you right back into the operating system, and Mint does the exact same thing. Just lets us back into the operating system. Lets us use the operating system the way we would like to use it. So next up, I'm looking for Mint's App Store. And don't forget, this isn't like Microsoft's App Store or the Mac App Store. We're not getting ripped off here. Back to the Not a Start menu, hover over all applications and look for Software Manager. This is different to our Update Manager, much like all of our settings being broken up into different apps. So once we have our Software Manager open, it's as simple as clicking the search bar in the top left and searching for Steam. Here, as opposed to Manjaro, we have one very obvious option. But before we click install on that, I'd like to bring your attention to something else. See this little icon here? We have Flatpaks working out of the box on Mint. If you've watched my Manjaro video, you might remember that I mentioned that you had to go into a menu and enable them, which isn't too bad, but again, the focus is beginners. Can you give this to your non-tech savvy friends and have them use it without them calling you every 5 minutes because there's a problem? So I really like that Flatpaks are out of the box here. And another layer that I like, and you might not like this, but I do. This isn't every Flatpak. This is only verified Flatpaks, meaning that if something isn't supported by the developer, it's not going to be in the software center. I think that is incredible for a beginner specifically. If you like to experiment, all you have to do is go to the hamburger menu and enable unverified Flatpaks. Steam is not a Flatpak though, so we're going to install Steam. And we'll get a list of dependencies coming up now, just like on Manjaro. These dependencies won't go if we uninstall Steam. However, as I've mentioned before, I don't mind Steam moving into my operating system permanently, so I'm not going to uninstall Steam anytime soon. That's the whole reason I have a gaming PC, is so I can play games. Once that's done, we have the option to launch Steam from the Software Manager, or we can go to the Not a Start menu and click on it under Games. This is where it will be after we've closed the Software Manager. I'm just going to launch it from the Software Manager, and this process is almost exactly what you get on Windows, from Steam updating itself to logging in to getting to your library to going to install a game. So I'm going to meet you on the other side after I've clicked install. Today's benchmark is going to be Horizon Zero Dawn Complete Edition. This isn't the remastered edition. This is where we come into our very first difference in Steam compared to Windows Steam. Alongside Horizon Zero Dawn, we're going to get Proton installed. Quick refresh, Proton is the compatibility layer or the translation layer that allows Windows games to run on Linux. And the overhead or the extra weight that comes with running through a translation layer is non-comparable to the extra weight of Windows. So much so that some games actually perform better on Proton on Linux than they do on Windows. So once the game's installed, all I need to do is click play, and one final window will pop up that I don't think I mentioned last time, processing Vulkan shaders here. That is a good thing. You want your games processing their shaders before you get into them. It stops shader stutter. You can skip it if you'd like, but I don't normally skip it. It only takes an extra minute or two depending on how busy the game is with shaders. Now, I'm not running the most cutting edge hardware for this computer. This is one of my weaker computers. So when I go to benchmark Horizon Zero Dawn, I will be doing it on original settings. You'll see my specs come up in the benchmark results. Another thing, this computer doesn't exactly have good access to airflow. Again, this is a spare computer, not my main computer. So I think if I stopped thermally constraining it by keeping it in its current position, I'd probably get 60 frames per second. And that's pretty much it for Mint. It was a very simple process from beginning to end. The only thing that might take a little bit of getting used to is having your settings menus in different apps. But besides that, it's really functional right out of the box, just like Manjaro. As for the differences between Manjaro and Mint, the biggest one that comes to mind is definitely having Flatpaks enabled in the store by default. This is a personal preference of mine. I'm not saying that you should only want to use Flatpaks, but this is something I look for as a default setting in a distro. So it gets extra marks for me. So do I think Mint can replace Windows? Yeah, absolutely. Local accounts, automatic login, and no full page ads to use Microsoft Edge after a pretend update, that's enough to sell me. But it plays out of the box. There's nothing you really need to tinker with here. So I'd say if you're willing to take the jump, go for it.